should work just fine then. All right, we have our devices here. Mine's the old-fashioned kind. But
I wish I had
yeah.
one of those.
So, and actually, let's just say this is Libby and Morgan, and we're talking on the 1st of November,
Yes.
2018. Okay. Talking about poetry. Yay. Okay, so when did you start writing poetry?
I've always had an interest in it, but like never had the confidence to put anything down. So whenever I came to EKU, I started as a communications major. And I think talking to me, you would know that probably wouldn't work out for me. And
No, not at all.
but the first day of classes, I got so nervous for my public speaking class that I went and changed my major. And the head of the department asked me, okay, so what do you want your concentration to be? And he listed off all of them. And the only one like that I knew what it was creative writing.
Wow.
And I just got into like the actual coursework for creative writing this time last year.
Okay.
And I fell into it luckily because like I've always had like a craving for everything to be nice and neat and perfect, and we know it's not, but at least on the page, like even if you're talking about the messiest situation, like you can make it look and feel cohesive if you put enough work into it. And I think that's why I like poetry the best out of all the genres that I've dabbled in.
So, are you saying that you see like something about the form of a poem that
Mhm.
becomes a container?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting idea.
And every word like has to have more meaning, I think, than like in fiction or nonfiction. Like you have such limited space,
Mm.
unless you're writing like an epic poem or something. You have such limited space that every word has to have. You know, if every word is costs $1, you know, you don't want to waste your dollar on something that doesn't bring more meaning to the poem. So I think that's why I like it so much.
Okay. Do you, when you write your poems, do you do a lot of revising?
Yes.
Yes,
And that's
because that's how every word counts.
yes.
It's not the first draft that has that. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What I do, and I want to ask you about your craft too. Whenever I write, I put everything on like size 6 font and just word vomit onto the page, and then I'll leave it for a couple days or maybe a week, and then I'll go
That's
back
interesting.
and like blow it up, and then see if I've got anything that makes any sense at all, and then work from there.
That's really what I'm about to note down is that 6-point font. I know why you would do that, so you're not tempted to go back and work with it because you can barely see it. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that is so clever.
And then like also if you're working like in public, you know, sometimes I get embarrassed. Like, what if somebody comes and looks at this, and you know what I'm saying? So, like, and then um, sometimes when I'm writing, I get frustrated. Like, oh, this isn't perfect. Like, you know, from when I first start, and that's not realistic. So that keeps me from like fixating on that. I wonder if it's recording. Yeah, it is. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, right. That's right. It sort of lets you let it go at least for a while and then come back to it. So yeah, that is really clever. So sometimes my process is more like that, or just a kind of a spill. And in fact, often my poems begin, or at least sometimes they begin in prose. I mean, where I'm just writing.
Mhm.
I don't always know that it's going to be a poem.
So, do you do other genres as well?
Yes, I do. I write nonfiction, a lot of nonfiction. And of course, in prose poems, I mean, you can think about short forms that also that don't have line breaks,
Yeah.
But that's only some of the time. But when I'm working with ideas about something, often I'll do that spill and just try to get it down. And then it's not a poem, but I can set it there and then come back to it. And often I've learned that if I do that, if I create a file and if I have that in working material, there'll be sometimes when I have time to write, but I don't really have anything that's pulling me right that minute. I can go back to one of those word messes
Yeah.
and see if now is the time that I can see what that needs to become and work on it, because I think that muscle of the generating material, the forming and shaping, and then the editing, those are fine tuning. Those are
Hmm.
kind of different muscles.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm more ready to engage in one than another. So
Yes.
I like to have time to, so that I'm not forced. Like I do think it's really hard to get the precision in a piece on in an early
Yeah.
draft. You kind of have to set it aside and go back to it in order to see it clearly enough to see where those small changes in words or line breaks or sound, if you're wanting to intensify an image or
Hmm.
sounds in the poem, that's going to come later for me once I figured out what the poem wants to be, which is seldom at the very first
Yeah.
draft, if
Um,
ever.
and then I liked how you said that, like, sometimes you will start out as like a short story or just, jotting
Just
down
prose.
ideas, prose. And
Yes.
so how do you think that impacts like the craft? Do you think that if you write down, for instance, like a scenario, you ran into someone at the store or something, do you think that um, that piece, do you often find that it lends itself to more than one poem or maybe even an idea for like a
hmm
collection?
Yeah, I think it does. It provides material that can grow in different ways. And sometimes the poem, when a poem comes out of that, it may actually be out only of a piece of what there was on the page. So that
Hmm.
other material is still there and available. I like to think of it as, and I need a better metaphor for this, but a used car lot, where you've got lots of bits of writing hanging around that you can turn to if you're looking for something, or you
Hmm.
you know you need something, you want to make a connection. But I think it's key not to be fearful of putting down things that seem disconnected or nonsensical. uh, Something was pulling you, the language or an image, and even if it doesn't go anywhere, then who knows when that might be the very thing that you need to get to take an idea forward, for instance.
So, thinking in this context of um, how going back to previous writings can either help you like build onto, new things
hmm
or add to another collection, how was it different working with all the different authors in
hmm
Balance of Five compared to working alone and making a cohesive piece, like finding your voice within
hmm
those pieces?
Well, the thing with the collection now, you see, those we wrote our poems individually.
Hmm.
So the process, the collaborative part of the collection was selecting them and then ordering them. So that's a little different from a collaboratively composed
Hmm.
piece, you see. So most of the poems for all of us were ones that at one time or another we had brought to one another and gotten some
Okay.
feedback. But we did do additional feedback once we really got the contents of the collection there. So it was more that one poet would say, well, I have this poem that I'd like to include, and I would say, well, I have a poem that kind of relates to that or touches on that. So then we'd say, okay, we'll put this one in, and then those pieces that were going to end up there, we tried to reread each other's and make suggestions about small kind of local revision. I
Hmm.
think at that point, no one, if somebody had said, well, I don't think that poem is finished, or, I wonder what would happen if you did it from a whole different point of view, or,
Hmm.
a big revision like that, then we would have said, well, then that piece shouldn't really be in this
Okay.
collection, because we at that stage we weren't really trying to generate new material. We were trying to make a balanced collection. And so an important decision in Balance of Five, because we looked at some other groups of poets who had put out collections, and the more typical way would have been to have had a section with my poems. So there would have been about like a chapbook,
Yeah.
like 20 poems, and then I could have created an order within them and so on, and then it would be the next poet. But we decided we wanted to try to define kind of loose themes, or topics and then have something from each of us that would go into that section. and then intersperse it so that if you read along, if you're actually reading in order, you would have the voices would change kind of page to page because we thought that would, that juxtaposition would be interesting. So that was part of the art there, is trying to figure out an order that within each section that made sense.
So, how does that differ from a, would this be considered a chapbook?
Yes, that
Above the
is.
Eastern Tree
Mhm.
Chops Blue. So, how does you had to collaborate in order to put your voices together so that they're balanced in this one. How do you balance your own voice in your own work?
Right. That's a huge question. And the art, there are books written about making collections of poetry. Um, so you try to read that and talk with people and then think about what works for you. But um, because it is satisfying to collect a body of work. A chapbook is typically 20 to 30 pages of
Mhm.
poetry. A full length collection is usually 50 to 80 pages.
Okay.
So that's sort of the terms you think in. Um, so even for a chapbook, there's a substantial number. I think I have 26 poems in that book. Um, so I know poets who have actually had a subject or um, I won't say a theme, maybe a subject would be best. But at any rate, they then actually wrote poems about that subject,
Mhm.
and that's how they generated the collection. That hasn't seemed well. I'm doing a project now where I'm thinking about the different dimensions of it, but still for me, the poem is more an individual thing.
Mhm.
So for me, it's more taking that collection was pieces that I had written individually, some of which had connections, like the desert poems were
Mhm.
written over a single week in the desert, um, but that I hadn't thought of as being part. I hadn't designed them to be part of a collection when I first wrote them.
Mhm.
They were being their own thing, you see.
Mhm.
So in making the collection, I had in 2009, a year before the book came out, I had taught, for the first time, I had taught a course in contemplative writing, and I had taken students. It was a 1 month course. We had it in January. We used to at Berea. So students took only one class, and faculty taught only one class, so you could really concentrate on
Yeah.
the work. So we spent about half of the class on retreats in various places. Two here in Kentucky, two short retreats, and then
Oh.
we had a that might be the power going out. I bet it will go back on. We had a 10-day retreat out in the desert
Oh.
where I had been the year before and so on.
Okay.
So, any rate, I didn't write these poems during that month, but I began thinking. I was very influenced by the experience of mining creativity among a group who were dedicated to that and doing a lot of them. Everybody did amazing writing in that month. And the working title that I had for that collection, in fact, when I sent the manuscript in, it was titled Abundance.
Okay.
So that was kind of what I had been feeling. And so once I had that idea, I looked at my work from the past 6 or 7 years and looked to see pieces that I had that I thought in some way spoke to that sense of abundance.